what's going on, guys? It's me, Train Man, and welcome back to the Zombie Train, episode 198. We are approaching the mythical 200, not that anything is really going to change. We're also a few episodes away from another run session, that's 203, although that is a little while out. So anyways, today I'm doing a bunch of terrain work up in the old main, nothing really breakthrough, interesting, or mind-boggling. I was just kind of tired of look push pins, so I decided to come do this instead. And it needs to get done anyways. This area is missing a lot of its terrain features and things like that. So I figured that, this would be a decent project for right now. Anyways, this question this week was submitted by Jacob Durbin over on episode 185, and it was, did the zombie train do anything in Europe? And that's an interesting question, because yes and no. Now, I have talked a little bit about sort of the stuff that's going on with the Britons before, and things of that sort, and going to be honest, I don't know much about the sort of socio-political, geopolitical climate of what was going on over in Europe, in Asia, in Africa, or really anywhere else other than the place that I'd seen directly, which was North America. I was very disconnected from that, and I had to more or less pay attention to what was going on in my own neck of the woods first, before worrying about anything else. So I can't tell you much about what was going on in Europe, but the question specifically is, did we do anything in Europe? And the answer is, sort of. Because the old country there is, half a world away, almost literally, and it so happens to be that we didn't, it so happens to be that there aren't any rail lines connecting us, which I don't think comes as a surprise to anyone at all. But needless to say, we did have interactions with people from Europe, and we even had to go in to retrieve some of them. Now, this is sort of where it gets tricky and where we really come in. So after the Zombie Train Incorporated, which of course before then we didn't care about really anybody else at all, it's not as if we were supposed to, we were just trying to stay alive. We didn't have a greater mandate until, the US military/government came in and said, listen, we're going to give you guys, your mission should you choose to accept it. And I've talked about how we reached the bottleneck before of, hey, we're running out of engines, we're running out of motive power. We have a lot of diesels lying around, there are hundreds, if not thousands, tens of thousands, I don't know how many locomotives there are in this country, plus Canada, plus Mexico, and, whatever else we could get our hands on. I don't know how many there are, but there were a lot of diesels that we had to sideline because we didn't have the fuel for them. And on top of that, the Navy was sort of wearing thin, and this is an episode that's coming up in a long while about the use of nuclear power, but the Navy was using the bulk of their nuclear fleet in the Pacific for problems that I will get to later, and we were left with whatever we could scrounge, which was primarily sail-powered vessels and coal-powered vessels, and the occasional ferry or tug that we absolutely never used unless we had to, because we had a very limited supply of things like diesel fuel, gasoline, etc. So, without oil, and we had oil, there was plenty of crude that we could get our hands on, but we didn't have operable refineries, and we didn't have the expertise to get them back in operating condition. I'm sure there's somebody in the Navy that we could have poked and gotten to help us, but we would have had to poke harder than we did, because we tried to do this sort of outreach, and we even tried to pitch it like, listen, you'll be able to get your hands on most of your fleet if we should do this, but they didn't really have the manpower to need to care about having more fleet. So it sort of left us with they're not going to be helpful, we've got to reach out on our own, and we ended up getting in contact with these people on the Mediterranean coast, And of course, I fail to remember if they were in, France or Greece or Italy, but it was a major coastline refinery, and it was the, help we are being besieged not simply by zombies, but by other people. They weren't being particularly forthcoming with helping the people around them. I don't really know what all was going on. I just know that this, there was a group that was quarreling with them very heavily. And I believe they were from, Eastern Europe, and the people themselves were from around the Mediterranean, although they sort of had a smattering of individuals. I don't need to break that down right now. It's, just, they were a diverse group, needless to say. And they had all come together and ended up at this refinery and were holding out for dear life, blah, blah, blah. Although it wasn't quite as desperate as I'm sure they made it seem, because when we got there they were still fine, and it does take a while to get there. But it was, they're having problems, and they're looking to get besieged on both sides, because they had an agreement, or they were going to have an agreement, with the Britons, who I will reiterate who they are in a second, and they did not have friendly relations with these Eastern European folk, whoever they were. And so they were being besieged by land, of course by people and by zombies, and they were going to be besieged by sea soon enough, because the Britons as well, they wanted that access to refining capability. Do keep in mind that most of the infrastructure, just in general, was beaten up, if not destroyed, on the day of the Great Panic, because, as the name would suggest, it really was just utter chaos. It's like every natural disaster, if you see the fallout of that, with people looting and blowing stuff up and doing whatever the hell, because it's pretty much lawless, just multiply that by a couple hundred. And that's the Great Panic. Also make it worldwide. And also make there be a legitimate threat. There's actual, the living dead are coming to kill you. And you need everything you possibly can. And that led to chaos, of course. So, anyways, the Britons, to recover who they are very briefly, they are a group of individuals from the British Isles, from England, who were, I believe, quite knowledgeable in the ways of steam, and they managed to get a handful of ships under their command, including the P.S. Waverley, which they used to tow around a destroyer which had working guns. And they tried to attack us with that at one point. Actually, they did succeed in attacking us with that at one point. And additionally, I'm not actually sure what the official designation is, but HMS Warrior. And that was a sight to behold until it was attacking us. And apparently that was the sacrifice of a number of steam engines just to get the boilers for that ship. Because if you don't know the Warrior now, you can look up what it is, but it's a museum ship and it's pretty much non-functional, is the way things go. They also had the Unicorn, I think, and the Trincomalee, sister ships. The Unicorn they had to rig themselves, but the Trincomalee, of course, had sails up, and they were doing their best to sort of keep their area clear and keep their area secure, and of course they wanted more power, they wanted their hands on the fuel, and they wanted to make a deal, but apparently it fell through. And so they were moving in by force to secure basically the same people and resources that we were, although the people were not quite so willing. So this led to us in two phases. The first phase was actually settling the deal, seeing what we had, and sort of working everything out and doing whatever defense we could, because the problem was, I believe, well, the thing was we had to convert the Liberty ships the two of them that we could get our hands on, we had to convert them from oil to coal. And that was not a terribly bad conversion, because they were designed to be fueled by, or well, they were designed to be configured to be fueled by either, because a lot of them were given to Britain, which had more coal and oil at the time. This was World War II. So, during that conversion, and also we had to get into ship shape the USS Olympia, which is an armored cruiser. And that would be our sort of big guns for the trip. We did not take the Enterprise, the ZTZ-1, because of problems with sourcing helium and sourcing fuel for the engines as well. So we tended not to use that unless we had to. Anyways, we went out there. We did in fact go out there on the Constitution. It took something on the order of 2 weeks, maybe a little less. No, I think it may have been more. But something on the order of 2 weeks. We had the trade winds with us, so it wasn't too bad. And when we got there, we managed to secure the perimeter. We brought as much as we could in the way of supplies. And we made quite good friends with this group of individuals. The zombies were pretty much a persistent problem, and then every time the zombies would go away, we'd have an attack by the Eastern European guys. Again, I don't know where they were from. I don't know, what they were doing. All I know is they wanted what we had, and from the moment I was there, we were getting shot at, pretty much. The moment they were there. So they obviously didn't want to sit down and talk. As much as that would have probably been nice, because having an ally in Europe against the Britons would have saved us a little bit of headache later on down the line, at least in terms of making a distraction. Because that would have been nice. But anyways, these people probably wanting resources, or probably wanting the power from having the control of the oil, or maybe even being attached to the Britons, I have no idea. They would try to get into the camp, and then when they would give up, the zombies would show up, and then they would fight off the zombies, and etc. It sort of went in a cyclical fashion for another week or so, while we waited for the other two ships to arrive. The John W. Brown, the Liberty ship, actually goes slower at full steam ahead than the Constitution does under full sail and a good wind. So even they left after us, and they took extra time to catch up. So, it may have been a week. It was likely more than that. And then they finally showed up, and we started getting things loaded onto the John W. Brown. Before that, I think we had a skirmish with the Waverly pulling the Belfast, which is a destroyer. I don't remember the actual details of that. I'd have to look into it. But I know there's a little bit written about that, at least. But that was really the only interactions we had with Europe. I never set foot in Britain or on any of the islands there. I never set foot anywhere else that wasn't that fenced-in oil refinery, basically. So we got out there. We recovered what we could. We recovered the people we could, and then we headed back to the States. On the way back, we did encounter the Britons in full force, which would be the... Oh, they also had something else. They had, I think, U-2580, and this is something I'm going to have to look up, because I'll do it real quick. I've only got a little bit of time left. No, that isn't it. Okay, so I'll just have to figure that out then. There should be a page on it. I know where there will be. But yeah, by far the scariest thing that they managed to have at their disposal was a fully functional U-boat that they did not hesitate to use against us. And so we had, somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the Constitution, the John W. Brown, which is not much of a warship, and the USS Olympia versus the Warrior, the Trincomalee, the Unicorn, and this U-boat, which, let me just get the number real quick, just at least. A U-2540. I was really close. It's Willem Bauer. And going to be completely honest, we came real close to not making it back to the States at that. I have talked about this before, but I will link once again in the description to a little excerpt called Meeting on the Seas, which will become part of a book someday, should I chronicle the Zombie Incorporated. Anyways, see you guys next week. Keep with the questions. Train Man out.